folks who've started their vegan journey through Veganuary, or maybe some people are just interested. I suppose the fear is that it becomes a January thing. I mean, we talked about it in the episode with Amy Buxton a couple of weeks back.
Yeah.
That you know, her concern was that it becomes like a post-Christmas, you know, diet. There's something to kind of help people shed some pounds, and then they get stuck into the vegan junk foods and all the rest of it, and it's not sustainable. So I guess it'd be good to have a little chat about that, and whether we can, you know, whether we can help some folks think about how to make it sustainable. So what's your thoughts on that?
Well, I do agree with Amy in that I think Veganuary has become a lot more commercialised. I still agree with it. I still think it's a good movement and a good initiative to get people even just to try some meat alternatives and try and introduce a bit more veg and legumes and grains into their diet and just be a bit healthier. And obviously people are on a bit of a health kick, like you say, post-Christmas, so they intertwine that with more exercise and just getting outside more, especially with the lockdown. People's minds are more towards health and well-being and fitness. I've had quite a few friends who have signed up and who are trying it, or just people that are dabbling, not going full on. People come to me with questions and asking for suggestions for recipes and favourites of certain things, and some people still coming to me saying, I would do it but I love chocolate too much, would do it but I love cheese. And obviously going straight back and going, wow, this chocolate's brilliant, these are my top 3 kind of favourites if you like dark milk and white. I'm not a huge cheese fan anyway, but that's where you can get, you know, just trying to not discourage them if there's just one element that they're not sure about or haven't really looked into much, just to try and keep them on that path, really. But coming out of it, it's tricky because we did it with the help of documentaries, and I think you covered it with Amy, in that people just see this as a bit of a fad for a month and a bit of a challenge, rather than maybe looking into it a bit more. I don't know if some people might lead them to look into it a bit more. Maybe reading things, watching things, and getting a bit more information. That's okay. Thank you.
Yeah, like they see it like abstinence for a month, like a sort of dry,
like a dry
January.
yeah.
Yeah. Like, you know, this is depriving you of things that you...
Yeah, it's a diet to a lot of people.
Enjoy.
It's dieting for 4 weeks, I think. But obviously you can fall into the trap where it's, especially with the amount available now, which is a problem in a way, and a good thing.
Too much choice.
There's too much choice, and a lot of it isn't very healthy. A whole foods diet, not diet really, a whole food, you know, way of cooking and eating is the healthiest you can do and be. But a lot of the products that are available for Veganuary aren't particularly healthy. They're convenience foods, and they're very delicious, but they're not to be eaten regularly if you want to sustain it, really, and if you're looking to do it seriously, in my opinion. That's right.
It's a kind of a strange mindset, really, isn't it? The January thing, because and you fall into it as somebody who's been vegan for a while. You want to try everything that's out there. There's all these new, there's all these
it's
new
not
things.
as if we avoid it. We've been doing it for 3.5 years.
No, exactly. Almost 4.
Nearly 4 in June.
4
yeah.
in May, I think.
Or May for you. I was a little bit later.
But yeah, you want to try all these things, but the same token, you don't eat them every day, do you?
No, they're not designed for that, really.
No.
They're designed for companies to make money. And also, it's having that is it's like a treat meal. It's like having a takeaway or something. The sorts of foods you see most of.
If it does feel like I'm not seeing necessarily enough, and it might just be where I look, I always say this, but social media is a bit of a bubble. You don't necessarily see the full picture of things, but I don't necessarily see lots of information to help folks beyond it. I know the Veganuary site obviously does provide that kind of information, but when you go into your average supermarket, there's not really, it's not about showing people how to cook or recipe cards or anything like that. It's kind of, there's a vegan aisle or a vegan promotional end of a fridge that's full of, nice treats and stuff. But I don't necessarily see, like the supermarkets all do those kind of, or they used to do those kind of adverts that are like, trying to encourage people to try a recipe or whatever. I don't necessarily see them taking the same tact with Veganuary. I see them sort of saying, buy this burger.
Yeah.
So I think we talked about it with Amy, but I think there is something, there's a responsibility, I think, on all of us within the vegan community to not only show people how to eat, but to help people understand their sort of, their real kind of why. There's a little robin.
Oh.
As people probably gathered, we're on a walk, so we're walking around. There's a lovely little robin who's having a little spot of lunch, so we stopped to have a little look at him.
Nice.
Or her. I don't know how you tell which.
I wouldn't have a clue.
The gender of a robin, but let's move on from that.
Birds generally.
But yeah, I wonder whether there's enough information to help people sort of discover a why beyond this burger's really nice and you don't have to miss out. Like you said about that, whether there's documentaries or whether, people talk enough about their environmental impacts or those kind of things. But especially, I suppose, the dietary stuff's probably the entry point.
For most, I think, is it fair to say for most people?
Well, I think it's the thing that you have to overcome first, don't you? Because unless you're,
I don't think it's for most.
It's the sort of thing you have to overcome first because you're doing it 3 times a day. It's not like you're.
Yeah.
If you're buying clothes and you're trying to avoid leather and silk and wool and so on, you're not doing that straight off the bat all the time. Well, unless you've got some sort of shopping addiction, but you're not. So the first thing you have to tackle is the diet. So I can see why it becomes a bit of a focal point, because it should be. But
it'd be good to see any sort of stats and information on the people that sign up, like officially on the Veganuary website.
I think they've had a record year.
But how many of them actually continue and sort of, and transition through and do it beyond January?
Yeah.
And it'd be good if they could even capture like a little, I don't know, like a kind of end of January survey.
Do you intend on carrying on?
Yeah.
Out of the folks are you getting that sense that they're going to carry on doing it?
Well, one person sort of started off her own back, really, didn't use Veganuary for it. Just started looking into things after having a few chats with me and watching a few documentaries. And first of all, they gave up beef as a family after watching Cowspiracy, or half of Cowspiracy, I think. And then they went back, and then they sort of started, and then they've gone, pretty much the whole family have gone vegan, which is amazing. But over a kind of a prolonged period of time. One of our friends also contacted me just before Christmas and said we're going to do Veganuary. If you got any hints and tips, I haven't caught up with her since. It'll be good to know how she's getting on, because obviously they've got a little girl. But she didn't. Obviously, I don't. She only asking about recipes and food. I'm not going to say, oh, by the way, watch this, this, and this, because I feel like that's coming down a bit too strong. I want people to test it out and try it. And obviously, like you said, the diet is the sort of the gateway into it. And then if she is a bit more curious afterwards, then... But like I said, there's no pointers for people to do a bit more research into it as a sort of a lifestyle choice.
I think Veganuary do a good job in that sort of space, but I just worry that that organisation isn't necessarily the loudest, which is ironic, isn't necessarily the loudest voice for people.
No, but they need to be. If they're not, then fine. But at least maybe try and. I don't know. I feel like there should be some sort of responsibility, but maybe I'm just being a bit too over optimistic about that, or expecting too much. But if you're going to encourage it, it shouldn't just be seen as like a month's diet. It should be promoted in a way that it's a lifestyle choice and lifestyle change, and like you say, give advice on how it can filter into other aspects of your life. But that's not going to make them money, is it, really? I suppose they're looking for short-term gain.
No.
In the month of January.
Yeah.
Everybody's overindulged at Christmas. It's the perfect time to...
Yeah, it's like giving them another, spot on the calendar, isn't it? It's like, Christmas, Veganuary, Valentine's, Easter. It's like it's just another promotional event.
That does feel like what it's become a little bit.
Yeah, but then I think we can help folks. That I'm talking on a small level here, but I think we can all help people we know.
I'm literally talking about 3 people. It's not, I don't know hundreds of people I don't know hundreds of people. But
I reckon every vegan knows 3 or 4 people that are non-vegan who are.
And to be honest, yeah, if you widen that out, that's a lot of people.
Yeah. So what do you think the big thing that stops people sticking is? Like a lack of why, or a lack of knowledge about the nutrition, or?
Well, there's definitely that. I mean, even I still have that. I feel like I don't know enough.
Some folks walking some dogs.
It's really muddy just there. Like, really slippery.
Some muddy spots out here.
Probably hear it.
Yeah. You were saying?
Oh. I think one element might be the fact that, like Amy said, the food and the products that are promoted for Veganuary are not the cheapest. So a matter of price might put people off if that's all they're buying for that month. They're going to different supermarkets and finding the Veganuary ranges, because it is all predominantly meat substitutes, which can be more expensive, which is why they're not designed long term for everyday consumption. That might be a turning off point. Another thing is just maybe not necessarily finding all the alternatives of their favourite foods, or trying them and not really liking them. Cheese and chocolate always come up because that's two of most people's favourite foods. And also, like you say, I think people just view it as a diet, and they've deprived themselves of their favourite stuff for a month. It's a post-Christmas detox. They can't wait to get back to their normal food and their normal sort of meals and routines. I don't know how many people are inclined to look deeper into it without having more conversations with people and doing it over a prolonged period and not just viewing it as a month thing. I don't know, I'd like to know how many people go into it thinking this might be something I'll continue even for maybe a year, maybe.
That's 3 really good hurdles though to help overcome. So we got price,
Because price can easily be...
cost of living.
Yeah.
We've then got choice and still they're not being quite the substitutes for your favourites. And then I think the big one that you touched upon at the end there is like not really finding the why beyond the January. Not finding why you would want to do this beyond a health kick after December. So it's starting with the price, from your experience working your way into it. What's your top tips for how you avoid that kind of incredibly expensive weekly shop? Where do people go, do you think?
Well, just really bear it down to the kind of main essentials. Most people still buy fruit and veg and frozen veg, fresh veg. Doesn't have to be. It's not expensive. I think you talked about, was it with Chris, about the fact that single peppers are more expensive than packeted peppers. Got to think about plastic in it as well when you're buying. But anyway, this is a subject.
That's true though. There is those.
There is a
sort
price difference, which is frustrating.
Those oddities within it, aren't there?
Yeah, which I suppose is like a whole other subject, but
one I think
linked.
we'll come back to, because I think there's an important point to be made there on.
Because it's all linked to, being more environmentally conscious.
Yeah.
And just tins and grains. They're not like everyone always talks about lentils and chickpeas and beans and. We still eat pasta. Pasta's not particularly expensive. Rice, like brown rices. When our cupboard staples, for example, all those things. Plus, baked beans, they're vegan. What's wrong with those? Baked beans on toast. It's a perfectly fine meal.
I guess it's what to do with those things, because I think that's a great point, is that those things are not...
True, yes.
They're not expensive. All those things that you've mentioned there.
Yeah, you can fill a cupboard with them but still not know. But then I've never been very good at cooking, as you well know. And as we talked about before, our sort of first favourite vegan meal was just a huge tray bake of roasted vegetables with some couscous and some homemade pesto. And all that, literally, cut the vegetables up, put them in a tray with some olive oil, salt and pepper, roast them for 45 minutes. It tastes incredible. And pesto is like 4 ingredients. And the only place I had to go to get that was Delicious Yella. I talk about her a lot with people that I know are trying out Veganuary.
Yeah, well, and then you adapt that pesto recipe that you got from Michelle Kane and Tony Okamoto from the Friendly Vegan Cookbook.
That's even better. That trumps Ella's.
Using the walnuts. Is it walnuts that are in
walnuts,
there?
Yeah. So basically, walnuts, nutritional yeast, salt, fresh basil.
Yeah.
And some rapeseed oil.
You mentioned a couple there, and also that prior, you mentioned a couple of resources, but also prior to going vegan, you weren't necessarily into cooking. We weren't, together we weren't particularly. No. It was often a culmination of packets of things. It wasn't necessarily hugely processed, but it was like a bag of salad with a protein in the form of chicken or whatever.
We did used to eat hummus. That was quite vegan of us.
And hummus, yeah. So not necessarily in that all those things together. That might be a bit slightly odd, but well, that'd be all right. Yeah, in terms of learning to cook, do you think that's kind of an absolute sort of must for people who want to continue into veganism beyond January?
I think it does definitely help, yeah, and I think it would help you avoid heading down to the supermarket and just filling your trolley with a ton of convenient, expensive junk food, which you can just stick in the microwave or the oven for 20 minutes. I think just once you start realising that vegetables are the main and not a boring boiled kind of soggy side, and you realise that they actually have loads of taste and texture, and just actually spices. It sounds obvious, but I never used to cook, so I didn't really know how to use spices or what to use them in. And once you learn a recipe, like a curry recipe that you find from Bosch is another one I love, you can adapt it to what you've got in your cupboard or what vegetables you've got. It's great for using up vegetables that you've got in your fridge. And you can introduce loads of different spices that I never even had in my cupboard before. So I think just trying to be a bit more open-minded, try a few things. I know time is a factor, especially with kids. And once Arthur stops napping, I don't know when I'm going to make anything.
Hello, Bob. Hello, Bob.
There's some other little chaps out on a walk. Having a lovely
We've
time.
hit a really muddy bit, so I'm trying to keep
We've
my
got a bit-
balance.
All a bit stuck in the mud. Yeah.
I'm going on a tangent a little bit, but I'm just basically saying it's one thing, like you say, one food in your cupboards, but then you need to learn what to do with it. I think start with a couple of basic recipes, like if you love curry, find another curry recipe that takes the meat out and replaces it with chickpeas and vegetables. If you can make a curry paste, then you're away. Then just add whatever you want. Coconut milk is a huge one for me. Absolutely love coconut milk. That's not massively expensive. Add that to a curry and it's completely different.
I
So
think there's an interesting point about time though.
Yeah.
I remember when we went vegan, we would have said, well, we haven't got time to cook, so on and
because we
so
both
forth.
work full time.
Both working full time, etc. We didn't have little Arthur at this point, but we still, came home from work and you're hungry and so on and so forth. I think there's a couple of things in that one is like not allowing yourself to get so hungry that you have to eat immediately, and I'm really guilty of that throughout the day. I think if you end up in that position, then you're not gonna want to cook. And then the other thing is like using that as a bit of family time. I remember us talking about this at the time when we went vegan, that we used to come home from work, get a couple of packets open to eat food, and straight onto the sofa, TV, iPhones and all the rest of it, and didn't really see that as useful time to listen to music or a podcast,
Catch up
or
on your day with each other.
have a discussion with each other, or
Yeah.
there's actually, I think,
Exercise.
yeah, I think times like time is definitely a concern for people, but at the same time, you always find time to do the things you want to do.
You just got to try and incorporate it into your day. But like I say, we're going to have another challenge when Arthur stops napping, because that's when I cook.
Yeah.
But hopefully he'll be at the age where he can occupy himself a little bit better.
Or you can go down the road that other people go down, like who don't necessarily do that every day cooking, and that's the meal prepping stuff,
Yeah,
which we've
and the
never
batch
been
cooking,
very.
which we're shocking at doing.
Yeah.
Everyone says we just need to batch cook and stick it in the freezer. But I'm like,
It's just good advice generally, whether you're vegan or not. I
oh
think
god, yeah.
it's good advice that we don't tend to follow, but it is good advice. But yeah, so learning to cook, I think you've established
It doesn't
there
have to be
is
amazing.
pretty
I've only
crucial.
got probably a catalogue of about 5 different dishes that I know how to do, which you're probably bored of, but that I rotate on like a sort of weekly basis. I'd like to try something a bit more adventurous eventually, but at the moment it's just sort of adapting and chucking in new spices and herbs to something, and it makes it taste totally different. Or just trying like an element of another recipe, not the whole thing if it's a bit too intimidating. Like I did that with dumplings the other day, which I was like, I've never made dumplings before in my life. And they were super easy. So, and add that with something that you make all the time. And then once you start trying new things, you just build up a whole repertoire of nice, easy, relatively fast meals. And the good thing about obviously cooking vegan is you don't have to defrost anything. You don't have to make sure it's fully defrosted before you cook it. You don't have to cook it at a certain temperature. You don't have to cook it for hours and hours and hours. It is a time-saving way to eat because
yeah, that's true. Yeah.
there's nothing really that takes longer
If you eat
than
something
about half an hour in the oven.
you eat something slightly raw, the whole family doesn't go down for
Exactly. If you eat a raw
48
carrot,
hours or something.
nothing going to happen. But
No, just been a
if
bit
you eat
crunchy.
a raw prawn or a raw bit of chicken, you're all done for.
Could be bad times, yeah.
So there's that as well. It's far less risky in that respect. So that also gives you a bit more confidence in cooking it. That's one of the reasons why I was never that confident in cooking, because you felt like you had to have meat in every meal.
Yeah.
I was never confident in cooking meat because I didn't know if I was cooking it correctly.
Well, it feels like a faff, doesn't it? I mean, like...
And it's expensive.
Well, that's
meat
another
is more
thing,
expensive
isn't it?
than vegetables and chickpeas, which you can easily bulk out a really good main meal with. That's the element people need to see. Not need to see past the Veganuary, products that are on the shelves just to make companies money. They're lovely, they're tasty, they're great, but they're a treat, and they're a once in a kind of a once, twice a week thing. But
yeah.
once you get properly into it and you actually just start realising that if you don't buy meat and fish, you can find foods healthier for you, with all the same nutrients and proteins in them that you need, at a tiny fraction of the price, and they'll go a lot further, and you just don't risk hurting yourself in the process or making anybody poorly.
I think as well, like in normal times, and I remember we did this early on, in normal times when the lockdown's not on, although you can still support your local restaurants through Deliveroo and all the rest of it, but if I think you can get real inspiration from just trying somebody else's food. I remember us going to Deliciously Ella's restaurant early on, because we were a bit in that space, weren't we, of like, what do you eat?
What do we eat? Yeah.
Like we were kind of like, we'd got the why, we sort of morally were there.
Yeah,
but
we know why we wanted to do it, but then how do we make this tasty?
other than eating cereal every day.
And eating cereal and hummus.
Yeah, and I think that gave real inspiration, because it was like, this is incredibly tasty, but it seems very, very straightforward. It's
very simple. Like you could. What
Which
I
way
love
are we
about
going?
it is, oh yeah, red. Probably. I think I was following the red trail.
Okay.
That's what I've been following.
Okay.
You could see all the ingredients. You could see that there's like a salad made of all these beautiful grains and quinoas and
Predominantly whole foods.
Yes, and you could see the vegetables that she'd used, and then obviously the hot drinks and stuff, and the shakes that she'd used, and the porridges, just with a bit of extra peanut butter and some extra seeds and things on it. You could just sorry, you fell over. You could just see how simple it was, but also it just tasted amazing.
Yeah.
It was a real eye-opener.
Definitely.
Because it doesn't cost a lot. You could tell that it wouldn't have cost an awful lot to make, really.
Well, in vegetables I feel the same about, and
Vegetables are
and
incredible.
biffs actually, but more on the sort of treat end of the scale.
Yeah.
Sort of, it definitely gives inspiration, I think. Make you think this is actually really, really doable. Forest Green Rovers was another one, going to eat there.
I just couldn't believe that we could have that sort of a meal at a football club. It was incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
So
definitely.
good.
So what was the second one we had? It was the choice over some of the treat stuff, some of the stuff you're used to. You're used to the way
Like alternatives, you mean?
a certain thing tastes. I think you talked about some friends who,
Chocolate and cheese.
it's chocolate and cheese, and it's the specific brand of chocolate that they like, and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Advice on that kind of stuff?
Just
Other than get new tastes.
just try everything. And I know that might be a dangerous thing to say, because obviously chocolate and cheese aren't still, they're even in vegan terms, they're still not the healthiest of foods. But just try everything. There's so many options out there. But also try and look for the more obscure brands, because obviously you've got the Galaxies now, and there's talk of Cadbury's bringing out a vegan chocolate. But I've had a friend I haven't even tried the Galaxy yet, but a friend has, and wasn't that impressed. And yet we've tried vegan brands who we'd never heard of before, who are absolutely incredible chocolate, So I think just places like maybe Ethical Superstore and
Yeah.
just some places that you might necessarily think to shop, just have a look at some other websites, and just go down like the sort of Sainsbury's are one, it's got like a wellbeing aisle now. Just have a little bit of a look down there, and because you might find some stuff that you wouldn't necessarily find amongst all the well-known brands, which actually taste better.
I think certainly when it comes to like chocolate, and we'll talk about this when we get into the kind of the why, but I think once you start getting into the ethics, the why you're doing it, you do start to look at the other impacts that your products have. I think you talked about it a bit with the plastic stuff and so on.
Well, yeah, because a lot of the lesser known, more obscure brands of vegan chocolate is a bit more fair trade, maybe.
Well, there's a huge human cost, I think, with cocoa farming around the world, and I think you need to be really mindful that vegan or non-vegan, that you're not funding something that you fundamentally would disagree with if you looked into it.
That's the next step, isn't it? That's the next level. That's going beyond Veganuary with it. That's what kind of I mean about the transitioning beyond the 31st of January. If you're looking at doing it short term, you just go and pick up a bar of Vegan Galaxy and hope that will kind of see you through, I think.
Yeah, and feel smug about your sort of, your ethical choice. But I think, it's not without its problems, buying into those kind of companies, the Nestle's and so on.
Yeah.
The Marses, the Galaxies, all these guys are not necessarily as ethical as you might think. You might be saving the lives of animals, but in fact putting other humans around the world who are being exploited, you might well be contributing to that, as well as the environmental impact of some of those companies. So I think that's sound advice, is kind of look into some of the smaller brands, some of the direct trade. Where's it come from? Are you happy with the ethics behind it, and so on?
We can do more of that. We don't do enough of that ourselves.
Oh yeah, everyone can.
Everyone
I think
falls into the trap of.
I think Chris and I talked about that last week. That if you think you've, because you're vegan, it's like it's done. Ethically, you're sound. You've got
completed it.
Yeah, you've got all the good karma points. I think that's a bit of a dangerous game.
And massively untrue and false, because there's no one can ever be. There's no such thing as a perfect vegan. There's always going to be areas that you can strive to be more considerate and conscious about. And there's always more research out there, more information to gain and gather.
Yeah.
I admit I'm not curious enough, and I'd like to be better at sort of finding out more about not just obviously the movement, but just like you say, the sources of a lot of things that I eat, and be a bit more conscious about the clothes that I buy, the cosmetics that I wear, which I'm getting better at. It is getting, but like I say, it's quite easy just to pick up like a brand off the shelf and it says a vegan on it, and I was like, that's brilliant, but that's not the end of the road there. That doesn't mean that you've done everything that you can. There are hundreds of other vegan companies out there that can provide something just as good a product, but with maybe less of a human or environmental cost behind them.
And try and support, small, I think, as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where we can, people who have, set up that business from the ground up and have.
They've meticulously sought out.
Yeah.
Suppliers and products, which have got a clean or cleaner history.
Yeah.
And background to them. So it's. Yeah, absolutely.
Human food sort of jumped into my mind then about, a small business that's really trying to think through what it's doing. There's lots out there, mentioned a few biffs and veggievores and so on, but, people who care passionately about the the ethics of what they're doing and look into every aspect of it, whether it's packaging or transport or where they source things from. I think that's also part of your sort of journey of discovery.
Definitely. It's ongoing.
Rather than just looking at the word vegan. But at the same point, I think you mentioned it sort of back then, there is so much, and I think it's dangerous to sort of start throwing stones at others. And you do see this sometimes.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. It's dangerous to start, casting aspersions about somebody else making poor choices or whatever, when those in glass houses kind of thing. I think if we uncovered the full extent of everybody's impact who lives in Western capitalist society, we've all got a negative impact. There's no doubt, I think. So be kind to yourself and others, I think, in that space would be my sort of addition to that. Is there's so much to learn. You're not gonna know it all overnight.
No.
And if you think you do, you definitely don't. Yeah. Which I suppose leads us on to your third point, which was the why behind it, and like where people would go to sort of top up their why, if you like, and understand more about why going vegan is such a great choice for so many reasons. Obviously, first and foremost, the animals and not unnecessarily exploiting and killing them, but also the planetary impact and the human health stuff, I think.
Yeah.
Actually, I've stopped talking about that as much because I think you can be really unhealthy being vegan, and you can be really unhealthy being omnivorous. I think that's kind of just up to you how you want to do it. But the first two are the most important whys. But where would you go? What is your steer to people?
Well, it's always been, even like I always mention Cowspiracy, because I think it's just such a hard-hitting documentary, and it covers everything. It covers all those sort of elements, but it does focus quite heavily on environmental impact, which is a huge reason why I wanted to go down this road after watching that. So I always tell people to watch that, and that has actually raised a lot of questions, and asked people have been, come back to me after watching it with better intentions going forward. The Vegan Society, I think their website generally for information about nutrition is useful, and also just finding like a definition of veganism, which is what we always go back to in a lot of times and on a lot of occasions. We're trying to get our point across. And they go through all the different nutrients and where you can find them in vegan foods and in all the foods that are readily available everywhere and cheap and accessible. You said not about health, but Forks Over Knives was also very hard-hitting. But
yeah, I do think it has an impact. I'm not.
It does. I think just to see what it can do, but it is maybe not an element. The animal side, I think there are some maybe more difficult documentaries to watch, which I haven't actually watched yet, which focus more on the animal suffering side. I don't know if people necessarily need to watch those. I don't know. I think that, like you said before, everybody has different things that affect them. I don't think they need... Everybody doesn't need to be shocked into it.
Yeah.
So I'm just figuring out where to go.
Although I do think it's important that people understand, you know, especially if they've not come across this before, that they do understand what is being done to animals
Yeah.
on a day-to-day basis and normalised and in their name, and that they're paying for. And if they saw it, they would probably, well, they wouldn't want to be in the room, certainly, and they probably, I'd imagine, couldn't do it themselves.
No.
And if they saw it happening, you know, in the street, would stop it. You know,
Yeah.
they'd report it as animal abuse, but yet they pay for it because it's behind closed doors, sort of thing. So I think it's, although I hear your point though, I think, you know, how somebody is feeling, those things are very, very difficult to watch. And so I think you have to, you know, you can appreciate something is going on intellectually, not want to pay for it, and not have to watch it all the time.
Yeah, I think that was my point, really. You
Which
don't
I think
have
is
it
a
thrust in front of you.
Yeah,
But
because it's
some people-
harrowing, you know. It really is. I suppose my point is just it's harrowing, but you can't close your eyes to it at the same time. You need to understand it's going on, so that you
Yeah.
can fight against it
Yeah.
in whatever way you're choosing to do that. So yeah, some good documentary recommendations.
Well, you probably watched more than I have, to be quite honest, and podcasts as well.
Yeah,
You can do some
Yeah.
good podcasts.
yeah. I
sort of
think
recommendations as well.
there's lots out there. There's so much information. There's almost that's the challenge. I think there is so much in the way of information out there. It's difficult to know where to start.
You don't want to overwhelm people.
When even within the world of podcasting, and especially at the moment, there's so many.
You were saying this morning how saturated it is a little bit.
It's saturated, and there's lots of division, you know, within the community. Especially at the moment, there's a lot of division in the community. There's a whole debate about which words are, you know, effective and should be used and shouldn't be used. And there's a particularly well-known influencer who I won't give credence to by mentioning, who's, you know, bringing up imagery of the Holocaust and so on. And you know, there's people who you can find who will advocate for that use of that word, and there's people, myself included, who don't think that is an effective form of activism, and actually think it's quite damaging, especially to, you know, people who've got multi-generational trauma over those you know, horrible events that have gone on. I think there are other ways to explain the scale of the atrocities that are committed, you know, in animal agriculture on a daily basis, without necessarily evoking such harmful, damaging imagery that's so evocative. But I guess my point there is that there are lots of people saying lots of things in the vegan community.
Yeah, it can be a bit.
And I would just encourage everybody to sort of, just like they would with their food choices and their, you know, their clothing choices and all the rest of it, choose your sources of information wisely too, and sort of follow nobody blindly, and be comfortable that some things you disagree with and some things you agree with. I think the debate is what we're missing these days. The discussion is what we're missing. It's too, you know, an Instagram story doesn't do any sort of debate justice. It's just bang, I'm annoyed about this, or I think this is great, or yeah, I don't know. It's just, I think that's why I've always liked the podcast form, because it's a, you know, depending on your form of podcast, it's a conversation, yeah. And there is nuance, and I accept that people will disagree with this, and some people will agree with it, and all the rest of it. But
that's healthy.
I think that's healthy. I think that's good. We should arrive at a place together that is better, hopefully, by being willing to accept other people's views. I mean, I know personally, like, throughout all of this particular, like, instance, that's this controversy that's going on at the moment, I've learned a huge amount, you know, through, you know, the things people have shared, and some things that people have shared that are contrary to each other, but I've seen two sides of a debate and an argument as a result of it, and I've got an opinion on which way I come down, but, you know, there's got to be discussion, and I think it's lacking. I don't know about you. Sorry, I went on one then.
No, it's fine. Well, I think it needed to be hands over to you because you're in that world. You listen to podcasts on a daily basis, host your own. Spoken to how many different guests now?
Well,
60
there's
plus?
66 episodes. Some of them I've had the same guests and some of them are live, so I've cheated a bit, but 66 episodes, yeah.
Exactly. So you've spoken to tens of different people from all areas of veganism. So with lots of different opinions and viewpoints and backgrounds and reasons for becoming vegan. So I think you're best placed to, you know, offer a more balanced view on it, really.
Yeah.
And
I do sort of. I keep going back to this point that Carol J. Adams made about saviorism, though, and I do think there is a. I don't know. I would encourage people, if they're going to donate money to somebody. I know it sounds blatantly obvious. Most people would think like this, but be comfortable that you know what that money's going towards, and you're comfortable with the use of it, and it aligns with your ethics. Because there's a lot of activists, quote unquote, vegan influencers asking for donations, and that's fine if you're comfortable with what they're going to use that money for. And it aligns with your ethics, and it's ultimately there to, you know, for the good of animals, for the good of the planet, for the good of other people. You know, if that money's doing good in the world, great. If that money's being used to fund a Bitcoin venture, cryptocurrency venture, or whatever it was, that was the one that was attached to this recent controversy, and I don't know one way or the other whether that is or isn't, it's just sort of stuff you see, then I don't know. Personally, I wouldn't give my money there, but that's up to different folks. Well, I would give my money to, you know, Tower Hill Stables,
Sea Shepherd,
you know, Sea Shepherd, Hunt Sabs. I said it last week, but I think, you know, people who you can see and feel a very real impact of what they're doing
and their passion.
Talking of Sea Shepherd, actually, I think you highlighted this to me, Peter Hammerstead on
Perfect Planet.
On Perfect Planet, the new Attenborough series, that's amazing to see.
Yeah.
Him being able to, you know, do his thing and talk so eloquently as he does about the plight of our marine life, and
on a global platform.
It's not our marine life, sorry.
Just
that's a very human-centric thing to say. Our marine life. It's amazing to see that sort of. I think there would have been a time, and it wouldn't have been that long ago, where people, the producers of that show, wouldn't have been comfortable giving platform to. I mean, God knows why, but wouldn't be comfortable giving platform to somebody like, or an organisation like Sea Shepherd. So that's great to see, I think. And there are lots of positives like that going on. Any other advice? I feel like I've gone off on one and lost you.
No, not at all.
Sorry, I felt like I needed to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. We've covered price and time. Well, obviously, I'm not going to probably go back over just trying to do it long term with the toddler, but because I've talked about that enough previously.
It does add a whole new dimension though for
It
families,
really
doesn't
does, because it's not just yourselves you've got to think about, but to be honest, it adds the most important dimension for me. He is the reason I'm doing this,
Yeah.
to try and give him a more compassionate future and actually a living, breathing planet to live on, and his grandchildren, his great grandchildren to live on. So I want him to see that we're doing as much as we can, even if he just ups and decides he doesn't want to do this himself when he's capable of making that decision. I hope he realises why we're doing it. I know we decided to do it before he came along, but he's just given me an even bigger reason to continue.
Yeah.
And there obviously are elements which might prove difficult the older he gets, when he has to potentially explain this to his own friends without us there. But like we've said before, as long as we arm him with the information, he definitely knows his own mind already, so that's not going to be a problem.
Yeah. I think if anything, I'll probably worry about him being too forthright. I don't know.
There's no such thing. I don't think.
I think he'd be a better podcast host than me already. He's strong viewed.
He is.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to food.
But yeah, it's almost a whole different episode, like with kids and that kind of stuff. But I think the same rules apply in a way that the things you talked about earlier. Doing your research, learning how to cook affordably for a family, integrating that cooking into your family time. Making it an event. Baking with
As anybody
Arthur.
else would do, yeah, vegan or not.
Exactly.
You still bake and want your kids to try and get involved. He's maybe a little bit too small yet to do the meal side, and the baking he does tend to get bored after about 5 minutes of stirring.
Yeah.
But he still likes the end product at least.
Yeah, exactly. And there's
a means to an end for him.
Decorating things and all the rest of it. It's just him feeling like he's involved.
Yeah.
Is important, and it's really nice time together.
Exactly.
I think I've been watching too much Toddler Club now. I feel like I'm trying to give toddler advice.
Toddler Club.
For people who don't know, that's a BBC show which sort of is aimed at toddlers but also gives parents some advice on
the same.
But it's not necessarily, it's nothing to do with veganism, but it's just
no.
It does
it's basically how to look after
manage your
toddlers
toddler.
in lockdown, to be honest.
It's very good. It's very good. Anyway, that's aside from the point. We should probably leave it there. I think we've been chatting for about an hour now.
Have we?
Yeah, I think so. It's
managed to get lost as well.
I hope this comes out okay. And we get some of the nice background noise because it's rather beautiful.
It's a stunning place.
Yeah, and in a weird way, it would be nice if people
weren't here.
I wasn't going to say that.
Oh.
I was going to say, I was talking to the people listening.
Oh, sorry. I thought meant the people that are walking around. I'm not a horrible person. I think lockdowns make me.
No, I meant it would be nice if people went, were doing their own version of this walk.
Just somewhere else.
Whilst they were listening.
I see.
I didn't mean go away. You just seem intent on getting rid of everyone.
I just become a little bit antisocial, I think, in the last 9 months.
But yeah, we'll leave it there. Thanks very much for your time. As soon as we hit stop record, I'm just going to carry on talking to you.
Okay, that'll be nice. Otherwise it'll be a bit weird.
Bye.
Bye.